And welcome everyone to CRE Unplugged. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nadine and I'm here with my extraordinary, amazing co-host, Ryan Elazari. Ryan, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Nadine, and thank you for the complimentary. It's really sweet of you. Nadine, what exotic location are you at now? You never sit still.
Well, Ryan, I'm so glad you asked. I am joining you and all of our fine listeners from the exotic, paradise-laden location of Canton, Ohio.
Ooh la la.
I know. Well, Canton, Ohio is my hometown. I'm an Ohio girl, as some people know. I'm visiting my folks for the month of November, spending some time here. And you know what I realized? I've recorded, I think, half of our episodes on the road. We did Mr. Spencer Levy from Montreal because he was giving me some tips about where to take my mom in Montreal. Lisa Picard was from upstate Maine, my home in Boston, and a few here in Ohio. So yeah, I like to keep you on your toes.
I know you're very transient.
Yeah, I know, but I know it's good to be here. I'm spending time with my family. Last night, I got together with all of my high school friends, all of us. This is a group that I've known since 1997. Listeners, you can do the math now and probably figure out how old I am. That's okay. No, so we all met working at a movie theater. This movie theater opened up in my hometown, 1997. We were all 16 years old, and we met working at this at a Cinemark Tinseltown, which was a big deal back then. And we've remained friends ever since. And man, I got to tell you, the shenanigans that we got into back then, we still get into today. Like, I don't know if you have this, but I get with my high school friends and our mentality just reverts back to like kind of that mentality we were in then. So we were reminiscing last night about this one story. We didn't do this in high school, but we did it together. It's probably been 7-8 years ago. So I was living in Cleveland at the time, and Football Hall of Fame is here in Canton, Ohio, where I live, right? You're a sports fan, and the induction ceremonies are every year, and it's like a great week here. It's fun. And there's the pro football, there's the game, there's the induction game, right? It's like the first preseason game of the year. So I'm with my buddy Ben, who's one of my partners in crime, and we're at the game. And Justin Timberlake was going to be performing that year. And we're like scheming, right? Dude, where do you think he's staying? Can we find it's Canton, Ohio. It's not going to be that. There's only so many nice places. So all the festivities were going to be held at this country club called Glenmore, which is a really nice country club. And it's got a Jack Nicklaus designed golf course, real nice. So Ben's parents belong there. We're like, dude, let's just go to Glenmore after the game and see who we can find out, right? And so he's like, let's do it. And so we start texting a couple of our other friends. We're like, hey, we're going to go find Justin Timberlake tonight. Are you in? And they're like, yeah, we're in. like that's just how we are. We're like, yeah, we're in.
Yeah.
So we pick up a couple of our pals after the game. We go to Glenmore. We're sitting in the bar and we're scheming, right? Like, I don't know if you ever watch It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, but we just scheme like that. We're just, we're just scheming like the crew, right? Sipping on martinis. How are we going to find Justin Timberlake? Well, when we walked into Glenmore, we see on the right side, there's a private party going on in like a ballroom. And we're like, what's going on in there? And it's Kurt Warner's private induction party, right? And Kurt Warner was like with the Rams, and he was being inducted that year. And we look in and it's glitz, it's tuxedos, it's like sequins gowns. And we're like, we got to get into that party. And so we're like, how are we going to get into Kurt Warner's induction private party? We're scheming. My one buddy's like, oh, we can go through the ductwork. I'm like, Greg, we're not climbing through the ductwork, right? Like, we're like, literally, this is like an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. And I look at Ben and I'm like, Ben, just go through the front door, man. He's like, let's do it. Like, we're in shorts and t-shirts going from a football game. And we just go to the front door of Kurt Warner's party and we just pretend like we're husband and wife. I walk in on his arm and we just walk in. And we look at each other and like, we got about 10 minutes before we were kicked out of this place. Let's make the best out of these 10 minutes. So we go to the bar. We double down on drinks each. We're like, thanks, Kurt, right? We're taking selfies in front of the ice sculpture that says like Kurt Warner, right? We see his wife. We're taking selfies with Kurt Warner's wife in the background. We're having the best time. And then all of a sudden, this man comes up to us with an iPad, right? He's in a suit. He's like, hello. I believe that we failed to check you in at the door. Can I have your name, please? Right. And at this point, I'm like, busted. I'm out of here. Right. But Ben is in it till the very end. So he leans into the scheme. He's like, yeah, the name is Evans. Right. And he just like he And the man's like, I can't seem to find your name. And what is your wife's name? And my buddy Ben tells me this. He goes, yeah, her name is, and he turns around. He's like, where'd she go? I was gone. I was like, bye, scheme's over. I just bailed on him. Right. And I see my girl Jess in the lobby who was supposed to come in. I'm like, what are you doing? She goes, I got pinched at the door, man. They didn't even let me in. Ben gets kicked out. Our other buddy Greg is like scheming about. He tells me last night, I didn't even know this. iPad guy comes up. He's like, excuse me, I believe you're with the Evans party. He's like, yeah. He's like, they've been waiting for you. Let me go escort you to them. Took him right to the door and kicked him out of the party. But we were like, it's the nicest way we've been ever kicked out of a party, right? And so there was a professional photographer in the lobby, and there was this like Hall of Fame trophy that pictures were being taken. So we, all four of us, got in front of the trophy and we're getting our pictures taken. At that point, they came like, out of here, all four of you, you're out of here, let's go. And we got kicked out. But we still to this day, we're very proud of celebrating Kurt Warner's induction with him that year into the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
That's a great story.
Oh man, I thought you'd appreciate that. Dude, what about you? What were you like in high school? Did you get into any shenanigans like this?
I got into shenanigans like from preschool to junior year of high school. I was always a big troublemaker, and a lot of people who don't know me don't realize that or don't believe that I was like that. But I mean, I got into so much trouble. I'll tell you one story. I was at a Mall UN in Yale with 20 other students from my high school, and they put us in one of the sessions, the Security Council. Okay. And the main topic of the Security Council was disarmament at the time. Mm-hmm. So I really didn't know what like the policies and like how to go about things like at the Mall UN. But I got dared by one of my friends to declare war at the council. So what I did was I became friends with so many different countries. I was United Kingdom, so everybody started calling me UK when I was at the UN in Yale, and people were just like, "Hey UK, what's going on?" And I was like, "Hey, listen, I want to declare war on India and Pakistan. Can you give me the support? I'm going to create a list." So I started to get a lot of support from everyone. So I went down to they called me up. I went down to the main stage. Instead of going to the podium, I decided to take a seat, and I took off my glasses because at the time I wasn't wearing contacts. Yeah. And I didn't realize this, but my classmates were all going like this to me, like, please don't do what you're about to do. Because what I didn't realize was the dean of my high school came into the session to watch, and she was all the way up on top. Uh-huh. The main person of the Mall UN, the president of the Mall UN, was right behind me. And I didn't see anything. So I get up and I go, I have a lot of support from these countries. And I start listing the names. And then I see the people in the countries doing like this, and I just like ignore them. And I go, and I get up and I go, I declare war on India and Pakistan. And the whole room goes berserk. Like, they don't even know what's going on. The main people who are like holding the Security Council, they're banging on the gravel, trying to like have decorum. Everyone is just like in shock and awe. I put my glasses on and I see my dean, and I went from rosy colored cheeks to like, I became pale. I knew what I got myself into. And I then turn around and I see the head of the Mall UN, and I realize how bad it really was. And the best part was the two kids who were representing India and Pakistan. They were trying to get up to like kind of give their arguments, and I went up to them like, "You hear what's going on here? You're not going to be able to talk. You're done.
Plans have changed."
Plans have changed. Long story short, I got grounded for the rest of the trip, and I wasn't allowed to go to the delegate dance. And but still, it was a really funny moment, because I remember coming back from school and everybody heard about what I did. And the seniors in my high school were like, "Pull up a chair, tell us a story about what happened." Like I kind of felt like I got my 15 minutes of fame in high school during that time because I was only a sophomore.
That is brave for a sophomore. That is very brave for, I'm not surprised you did that, man. You're always brave. You're always taking chances. Seriously.
Thanks. Thank
well,
you.
now that we've established that you and I are total hooligans in high school, and honestly, probably to present day, and now that no guest will probably ever agree to come on this show again. Speaking
Probably
of,
not.
Probably not. It was a great run. It's been so fun, Ryan.
It's okay. We could still just do this for fun.
It's fine. It's fine. Speaking of guests, we've got a great guest today and a great show planned. So let's tee it up of what we got planned for everybody today, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. Awesome. All right. So multifamily market, friends, is constantly changing, whether it's how people are choosing to live, what they can afford, or how new developments are shaping neighborhoods. Understanding these trends helps everyone, from property owners to investors, make smarter moves in the market.
The future of residential housing is full of questions. How will the economy impact rents? Will more people keep renting instead of buying? What role will technology and sustainability play? Thinking ahead is the key to staying on top in this game.
Yes, it is. And multifamily properties tend to hold up well, even when the economy gets rocky. People will always need a place to live, which keeps demand steady. It's important to understand what makes this asset class so reliable and how to get the most out of it.
In today's world, making decisions based on gut feelings isn't enough. Data helps uncover what renters really want, which neighborhoods are growing, and how to set up properties for long-term success. Knowing how to use these tools can make a major difference.
Yes, they can. And so today's guest will shed light on the power of data and how it can transform the way you approach property development, operations, and investment decisions. So let's get to it.
Let's get to it. And with that, I'm excited to bring on Michael Broder, CEO of Rockerbox. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Michael, as a fellow GW alum, I have to know, where were your favorite spots to go to in the DC area? I know Foggy Bottom was a popular spot, but for me, I always loved going to Adams Morgan. My favorite bar was Madam's Oregon. What were some of your places that you loved to go to, like back over there?
So when I was in school, we spent a lot of time at the Exchange and GG Flips, neither of which are there anymore. One of my favorite bars, which was always out of place, I thought, but it was such an awesome bar, was, you may recall, the Crow Bar, which was almost like a biker bar in the middle of K Street. It was a great bar. But when I was a junior and senior at GW, I actually managed and bartended at Third Edition. So I spent a lot of time in Georgetown and got to know a lot of the managers and bartenders there, which was always a benefit being in college and knowing people in the bar scene. So that was my kind of those were my typical haunts.
Oh, I remember Third Edition. I've had some late nights over there. That was a fun bar.
Anybody who ever saw the movie St. Elmo's Fire knows Third Edition, because it was filmed, all the bar scenes.
I didn't know that.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Oh, wow. I'm going to have to go rewatch that now after this episode.
Sadly, Third Edition is no longer there either.
Oh.
Now a restaurant, but that was just an amazing bar. It was a fun place to work, great college job, and it's certainly sad that it's no longer there.
Why do all the good bars have to shut down?
I think it's like anything. Everything is cyclical, right? They have their runs and then they kind of fall out of favor. Although it's interesting that in Adams Morgan, so many of the bars that were there when I was in school are still going. I mean, that is a unique, I think, district in DC in that regard. I mean, you look at Georgetown and how many of the bars that were popular years ago that were, I mean, for many, many, many years, they were kind of top of the heap, if you will. I mean, the Garrett's, Third Edition, Nathan's, I mean, all of these bars, they're all gone. They're all gone. And I think that's just a reflection of the times and how people have changed, what they like to do and where they like to go. It's, to me, Georgetown is very different today than it was when you and I were in school. It's a very different vibe, very different feel.
Michael, I saw that you also did your JD at the Catholic University. Is that correct?
Yes.
My father did his PhD work there a few decades before you were, in the 1960s. And he tells me a story about, he had a buddy, old beat down car. He's like, man, I got to get rid of this car. I don't want to get rid. I don't want to deal with it. And my dad tells me how he went to park it somewhere in some neighborhood, not far from campus, and just left the keys in it. He's like, problem will be solved. Like, don't worry about it or something. And the problem was solved like within the next day. So just an illustration of how I do think the neighborhoods have changed throughout the decades.
100%. I mean, even when I was in law school there, you didn't really veer too far off of campus because it was not exactly the best of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Although that's changed. I mean, you look at what's happening around Catholic and the surrounding or proximate areas, and it certainly had a bit of resurgence. I think a lot of that has to do also with the investments that the university has made in and around the campus as well, which certainly contributes to rebuilding that neighborhood. And it's, it was an amazing experience being there. I really enjoyed my years at Catholic, and I really enjoyed my time at GW for my undergrad and grad programs. They were, I had a really good educational experience. And I highly recommend both to anybody.
Great town. Are you still mean behind the bar with the cocktail shaker?
No, not really. I certainly know how to make the drinks that I love, but if somebody came and asked me to make them a cocktail, I'm not sure I could remember what the ingredients would be. So I can't promise that it would come out right.
Well, you've been quite busy, I think, since your days behind the bar at third edition. And speaking of busy, Michael, you have a wildly interesting career journey. Please take our listeners on a trip down Michael Broder memory lane, where you started and how it led you to where you are today.
So it's an interesting story because for those people involved in real estate, I would say that my career trajectory and many folks who work with me at Rockerbox who have similar career trajectories are not the typical path that one would follow into real estate. I began my career working in politics. I was a political operative, mostly on the campaign side, at the federal and national levels, and that really exposed me to some very fascinating data models and research techniques to really understand how populations respond to certain things. And I found that fascinating. And over the years through politics, and as I began to decide to exit out of the political world and really enter what I would call more traditional corporate America, because politics is a young guy's game or young person's game, I wanted to find an opportunity or a way to actually leverage the experiences I had in the political world and apply it to the commercial enterprise that I, was pursuing. And it's interesting that you brought up Catholic, because when I was in law school, every election cycle, I would take a leave of absence and go work in the political world, whether run a campaign, work for a committee, or work for a consulting company. And when I came back, one of my first orders of business was to go have lunch with the dean, because the dean, his name was Bernard Dobransky, great guy. He's no longer the dean of Catholic, but he fashioned himself as a bit of a political hack. So he would always like to get the stories from the field. So that was always my first order of business. And I remember coming back to school after the 1998 cycle, and I was having lunch with the dean, and at that time, Catholic had just finished completion of their brand new law school facility, which was a full new facility. It was one of the first of its kind in DC. Now all the other law schools followed suit after Catholic rebuilt their law school. And I remember sitting at lunch with Dean Dobransky, and I said to him, "You've just built this amazing facility. You've recruited some of the best professors into the school, And what are we doing to actually raise the profile of the law school? And he looked at me across the table and he said, well, isn't that what you do in politics? Could you help us do that here? I said, gee, let me think about that. So a week later, I came back to him and I said, okay, here's what I think we need to do from a research model and what that would enable us to understand and develop a real strategic plan to drive the visibility and value and reputation of the school. And he said, great, let's do it. And so here it was. I was going into my third year of law school, and it was the crazy dynamic because during the day, I would be sitting in class with certain professors like commercial trans or whatever it may be. And then in the evenings, I would be in the front of the classroom, and all of my professors who were on the strategic planning committee would be sitting in the seats that I would sit as a student. And it was a very interesting final year of law school. But that is really where my business, which my predecessor business called Bright Line Strategies, was really born from. As I got through the project with Catholic University Law School, I started to wonder whether or not that there was a need for this across higher education. And by the time I graduated from law school, we had 17 other law schools as clients.
Wow.
And what was interesting is as we expanded in the higher education space, using these research models, which were born out of the political world to help figure out the strategic moments or inflection points to actually drive growth of a university, we started to then move beyond just law schools and professional schools like business schools and started to do work for large-scale universities, which then led us into the life sciences world because of the tech transfer offices that universities have. So my career started in higher education once I graduated from politics. And that led us to many business opportunities. And I can't say that it was anything that was particularly envisioned, right? It was very organic and opportunistic based on what we were seeing in those markets. And then one thing led to another. The very first life science client we ever had was Celera Genomics. And if you remember, they were the company that mapped the human genome. Craig Ventnor was a brilliant scientist who came up with the whole idea of shotgun sequencing to break apart the human genome. And he was working, on the same goal as Francis Collins was at NIH. And it was really like the public side versus the private side. It was a fascinating experience working with him and his team. And the life sciences was really a unique industry because that was at the height of the biotech boom in the mid to late 90s. And one thing, like I said, led to another. And that company, Brightline Strategies, which really was the premise behind that consulting business, was to apply the science and discipline of political research models and audience engagement tactics to commercial enterprise. I like to tell people when I speak at various schools and other engagements that, everything that people use today in the marketing world, every tactic, every type of approach was first perfected in politics before it's ever made it to commercial enterprise. I mean, people talk about micro-targeting today in the commercial world. Well, we've been micro-targeting in politics for 50 years, right?
I mean, that's like the foundation, right, Michael? Like micro-targeting? Yeah.
Absolutely. Understanding what matters to whom, how does that influence their decision-making or actions, to what extent and why, right? And being able to get extremely granular in that information and being able to understand based on probabilities and predictive analytics, how something or someone will react or respond to certain stimulus to enable very strategic decision-making about a company's growth models or who their target audiences are, and really help understand what the potential of that organization is. And that is just like we used to do across the life science and energy sector and other industries that we worked in, including higher education. We now do that only within the real estate space. And And it's been a pretty interesting journey because real estate is such an old line industry, such a mature industry. And anytime you inject some new thinking into a mature market, there's always those who push back because it perhaps challenges conventional thinking, conventional wisdom, traditional behaviors. But the more you know, the more you learn, the better equipped you are to actually build better product and have that product perform and satisfy the needs of the communities it serves in a far more meaningful and valuable way.
Wow.
Yeah, I want to talk about your company, Rockerbox. Can you share to our audience members the product tools that you're offering to potential end users?
Sure. I appreciate the question. So Rockerbox really has three core products in the platform. One is what we call Miner, which I should back up 1 second just to explain people the name of Rockerbox, because all the names of the products are tethered to the brand identity. So a Rockerbox is an old, like a 49er day mining implement. It was what miners used to use to separate gold from gravel. And if data is today's currency, that's the name of our company, right? Because we are a data analytics decision intelligence company.
Data is gold.
Yeah, that's right. Data is the new gold. So the first product is what we call Miner. And this helps people understand when they're thinking about expanding their enterprise across geographies and entering new real estate markets that perhaps historically they have never done work in. How do they know which market is actually best suited for them based on the kind of product they build and who they tend to attract into that product? Now, there are ways that people have done that analysis in the past, but they're very limited in terms of helping you understand how a market is going to evolve, because it's not just about what happened historically, because we all know things change, and we all just came out of a global pandemic, and look at the how that has affected the real estate industry writ large in terms of how people work, how people live, how people interact with one another. So this tool helps you really evaluate whatever markets you may be thinking about in terms of opportunistic markets for your company to expand into. How do you know with a level of certainty and confidence that that market is going to yield the kind of opportunities and performance for you? So we're able to index and help people understand that through a variety of factors, but it all flows from the very people that live and work within that market, right? Our special sauce in Rockerbox is the polling data that we apply to real estate. And it is, statistically valid, it is statistically valid and powered to be representative of all populations within very specific geographies. So you're able to see and project forward how that market and those populations that comprise it are evolving and changing over time, and what that means to investment opportunities, to development projects, to management of existing properties, and ultimately, what are the things that you can control as a real estate professional, whether you're on the acquisition, development, or management side, that are accretive to the performance of those assets and projects, and which things are not, that you should not waste your time and money and effort around, because they're not going to move those proverbial needles. That's the first product. The second product is a little more granular. I'm sorry, did you have a question?
No, by all means, go ahead.
The second product is what we call Sifter, and this is really about, how do I optimize the programming of a property to be reflective of those populations that are likely to consider and choose that property over any others in the market? So part of the modeling that goes into this analysis is understanding, if you think of, here's the overall renter universe. Let's talk about multifamily property for a minute. Among that entire renter universe, who are those high propensity renters? In other words, those that are more likely to consider and choose your property over any others. and what matters to them. How does that affect their decision making, the places they choose to live, what they choose to live in, what premiums they're willing to pay to be in those types of projects and living environments and communities. And when you're able to understand that before you ever acquire that site, or if it's a value add repositioning opportunity, before you actually go hard on that deal, you actually can figure out exactly what you need to do and deliver to ultimately drive the performance of that asset in a way that is not just important to you in terms of the ultimate yield and return on that investment in that project, but also what's important to the end user. And so this tool helps you optimize everything from the unit densities in that project. So how many one bedrooms should we have versus one dens versus twos, relative to demand in the market and what people are looking for in their next live space, to the very granular finishes, like what kind of flooring or fixtures or hardware, which of those factors are accretive to demand and lease likelihoods and rent premiums, and which ones are not. What factors matter from an amenitization standpoint? I mean, for decades, there was this thing called the amenities arms race, right? So one developer had a building, and then there was a site across the street, and I'm being a little sarcastic here, and the building that was going to be built across the street was going to have every amenity that the building across the street had, plus one, right? Because that was going to be the differentiator.
Right.
Well, what we've learned over time is that amenities to some renters matter a lot, but to many, they're more eye candy on the tour than anything else. And I'm sure we've all had these conversations with developers and owners and operators who say, I spent millions of dollars building out these amenity centers and nobody's ever in them, or they're not used at the frequency we expected them to.
Right.
And that has a lot to do with perhaps you didn't actually understand who your renter base was actually going to be when you were building the product. So you were not equipped with the information to say, you know what, we should be making investments in these things, but not these things. This is this tool that actually helps you understand every component, programmatic component of a building, how to optimize it, and then what effect that actually will have when the product's on market in terms of how it will perform in terms of the competitive landscape and the overall profitability and yield of that project. So it's a very powerful analytical tool. And then the third product is what we call Prospector, which is a lease-up accelerator and renter targeting tool. Think of this as a get out the vote operation for lease-up. It enables you to be far more surgical in your approach to the market because you now know who your high propensity targets are, where they are most densely populated down to like the zip code level, what matters to them in terms of their leasing decision-making process and their decision criteria, as well as how to reach them, not just from communication channel based on their information consumption habits, but what are the points of stimulus, whether visual or verbal, that actually resonate with them, that actually move the needle in terms of making them more likely to engage with that owner and operator's product than somebody else's. So it becomes a very efficient way of actually building a lease-up campaign to drive a faster pace to a stabilized asset and also command the performance that that product can achieve, but is not always inevitable, right? It's achievable, but not necessarily inevitable,
right,
unless you go after the right people.
Yeah.
And that is really the power of that tool.
Michael,
go ahead,
I want
Ryan.
to go back to your first two tools.
Yes.
And I want to know what roles in the real estate industry are you disrupting? Can you explain that to our audience members?
So I don't think we're really disrupting roles. I think we're enhancing the decision-making capabilities of those roles. And what I mean,
but I want to say, I know a lot of developers and they go through brokers and architects to get that information for them to optimize, in terms of how many bedrooms they should have in a particular development. So in my opinion, I think you're disrupting those type of roles, don't you think?
I think we are adding a level of we're adding a level of decision intelligence that has otherwise not been available to all of those players. Now, could you say that that is disruptive? Do I think Rockerbox is a disruptive data instrument, data tool? Absolutely. But I don't want to say that some of the contextual market information that comes from various providers, whether they're other data providers in the real estate space or other professional services related to the real estate space, are not important anymore, because they absolutely are. But I always believe, and certainly this comes from my political experiences, that the best decisions are made as like a three-legged stool. You have to understand the historic context of a market or a population. You have to have your own experience and knowledge within that market or population set. And then you need to understand the actual population and where it's moving. And that's really where Rockerbox comes in. We're that third leg of the three-legged stool, because historically it's been, supply side data providers that help you understand what is the historic performance of a market or the demographics of an area. It's leveraging the architects and other folks who can inform some of the early discussions around what a mix should be based on their own experience. But isn't it interesting that both of those data sets or levels of expertise that really have shaped real estate development over the past several decades, never should the end user customer enter the discussion among those two data sets, right? And to me, that is one of the fundamental flaws about real estate development historically. And I'm not taking anything away from the intelligence and capabilities of the people involved in this industry, but it always struck me as odd when we got involved in real estate, first as Brightline right around the time of the Great Recession, then now strictly as Rockerbox, that end users were almost like an afterthought. And the irony of that, of course, is that it is the end user that drives the performance of a real estate asset. So to me, might we not want to understand what matters to them and how that's going to influence their decision making, and by extension, how that's going to impact your real estate project's performance downstream. So I would say the disruption comes in by adding this level of very predictive data and decision intelligence that does challenge conventional wisdom, that does kind of look at the old models and say, maybe that worked 20 years ago, but in today's world, based on how a market has evolved, I mean, look at what happened in the pandemic and how that has changed our live space behaviors, needs, and requirements. Well, using data that was relevant 5 years ago to try to predict what is relevant today, particularly as we come out of this pandemic, to me, that just isn't going to give you the information you need. You need to understand the end user and what matters to them and how that affects their decision making. That is the disruptive nature of Rockerbox. But I would tell you that people like architects, developers, institutional capital players, they value the data because it gives them a more holistic and predictive picture of what a market or a real estate project will perform like, and it makes them far better equipped to make smarter decisions in terms of what they buy, what they build, and how they build those products relative to how a market is evolving. Yes, it's important to understand the histories, but in some ways, it's almost more important to understand the leading indicators, where a market is going, so that you're future-proofing your product rather than trying to build it to how a market performed 5 years ago.
Michael, I have two follow-up points to that. So your one point on having to put the end user at the center of the conversation, I couldn't agree with you more. It's something that we've spoken at extensively here on CRE Unplugged with our past guests. And I think, and I'd love to know what you think about this as well, is that I think, decades of low interest rates, right, and favorable cap rates have allowed many different types of quote unquote operators and developers to enter the industry, right? Mm-hmm. And really with little to no effort, be able to experience favorable returns, so that really the end user, the occupant, whoever it is that we're talking about, really didn't have to be right? Part of the conversation, a part of the evaluation, a part of the decision making. So 2 follow-up questions to you. Did the pandemic was it a factor in you founding Rockerbox, right? Because of that shift, right? I think a lot of us would agree right now that the pandemic and then thus the subsequent rising interest rates have forced that mind shift right now for the industry to say we do need to think about the end user, because the end user now has more leverage than they ever have had in this industry, right? As we talk about the future of work and return to work. Follow-up question number 1. And follow-up question number 2, why focus only on multifamily? Why not on commercial? Why not on retail or any other sector within the commercial industry?
2 great questions. So let me take the former first, and we'll get to the latter next. So I think if I were to look back at some of the studies that we ran for various developers, owners, and operators from, call it 2010 up until 2019, we steadily saw changes beginning, or trends beginning to emerge in those research reports among the renter populations, and as well as commercial tenant populations, because we did both in the Brightline days. But they were still early. They were embryonic in nature. But year over year, they were growing in not just intensity, but also size, meaning how many people were shifting to those vantage points or perspectives. And so you heard when the pandemic rolled around, a lot of people in the real estate space called the pandemic a disruptor. Well, it wasn't a disruptor. It was an accelerant. What I mean by that is, because of the behavioral impacts that the pandemic had on all of us. Think about it. For 2 years, most of us were locked in our homes, right? And what happens when you spend that much time in a house? Well, you start to see the deficiencies of your live spaces, right? You say, God, I wish I had more space to do this, or I wish I had a dedicated work area to do that. And that, because of those 2 years, we formed new habits, new behaviors, which are now fully manifest in our population. And it's not, we all have habits we wish we could change, right? But habits are hard to break. And so because of the time horizon of that pandemic and how long we all had to deal with it and behave so differently than what had been the historic norms, these are now our present behaviors. And that had a fundamental shift in terms of the live space requirements people had, the office work environments people necessitated, what was the value of commercial office space really look like? What did it look like post-pandemic? Did people necessarily believe that they needed their employee base in those offices 5 days a week like we used to be decades prior, or 4 decades prior to the pandemic? Or was there a model now that we could still maintain the same level of performance, and in some cases outperform historic baselines in a very different work environment? And so it's no surprise to me that commercial office felt the brunt of that pain, because if you're a business owner, just like I was in the pandemic, who put our entire team on remote work on March 11th in 2020. But we didn't miss a beat in terms of our performance, in terms of our engagement, in terms of the workplace, what I would call, or Brightline culture back in the consulting days, because Brightline was winding down as we were scaling up Rockerbox at that moment. At the end of the day, you have to question, why am I spending this amount of money on commercial office when I don't necessarily need that space in the same way? So the pandemic changed the form and function requirements of commercial office. It's not to say that office space is not important. It absolutely is. But how it is utilized and for what purpose, and what does that mean from a space requirement and an employee requirement, is very different today than it was pre-pandemic. And to your question about why Rockerbox is now strictly on the residential multifamily side and not also on the commercial real estate office side, it will be. but we were had the good fortune of doing some very sophisticated COVID impact studies in partnership with BOMA and Yardi during the pandemic. And the first study we commissioned was in 2020, right at the time where we were about to begin development of the Rockerbox platform. When the research came back out of the field, we saw back in Q3 of 2020 just how significant the pandemic's impacts were going to be on the commercial office environment. And we were able to project by renewal horizon, by year, 3 to 4 years out, what that meant from a commercial office consolidation and compression of demand and need. And because of what we saw in our own data that we then publicly released in partnership with BOMA and Yardi, we decided to pause the development of the Rockerbox commercial office product suite because we knew for the next several years, office was going to be struggling to regain its footing, and there was no point in building that product, meaning the commercial office portfolio, at that time. Now, we were in development of those products in 2025, and we're very excited to bring those to market because they are effectively mirror images of what we did for commercial owners and operators and developers in years prior as our consulting company. And they have an equal amount of impact in terms of office product performance. But in a time when nobody was buying or building commercial office product, and certainly trying to hold it and keep that product alive, right? Even if it was on life support in many instances, it just didn't make a lot of business sense to deploy the capital to build that product suite at that time. But it is certainly something we will start to do next year.
Very exciting.
Yes.
Michael, I come across a lot of startups who need to refine their pitch to end users. They are more focused on just showing their demo and then actually speaking about the customer and discovering the pain points that an end user might need, right? So in your case with Rockerbox, like, what is your pitch strategy? How do you go about selling your product to them?
So I think whenever you introduce something new or disruptive, particularly in mature markets, there is always an education before engagement dynamic. And certainly as we began to introduce the Rockerbox platform into the market, we recognized that we needed to show people how the product actually could benefit them directly. And this isn't just a feature benefit dump, because a lot of people, when they build technology products, that's what they gravitate to, or they try to differentiate against the competition and say, look, our product does these things better. I mean, think how many providers there are in the real estate market of supply side data, right? All the big players, the Yardis, the Real Pages, the CoStars, and several others, right? They're all fighting over the same football to show them to the end user, well, our models are better. And that's kind of a red ocean, right? Because it's got so many competitors in it. Whereas in the space we're in, which is demand side leading indicator data, meaning the voice of the end user, virtually nobody in that space, other than maybe some consulting companies who can say, oh, sure, I can run a study for you, but nobody doing it at scale, and certainly leveraging the same type of political driven analytics. And I don't mean politics like R&D, but I mean the type of analytics we apply to political research that are highly predictive of what's likely to happen downstream. That space is a blue ocean opportunity, and was a blue ocean opportunity for us. And because of that, it's unfamiliar territory to the industry. So part of the way we engage is to really step people through not just the power of the data and what it enables them to do, but we also, in every initial discussion we have with prospects, we make the offer to say, give us a development project that you're working on or a potential acquisition target that you're thinking about, and let us run an output for you. And the demo of whatever platform they're interested in or product they're interested in is going to be about their own future product, right? But has a far deeper, more meaningful impact than just stepping through a technology demonstration, which is helpful to understand the capabilities of a platform. But unless you're actually looking at something that is highly relevant to you, your purview, your decision-making, it's merely interesting. Now, some people will buy based on that experience, but we find it much better to give something back to the prospect, whether they choose to engage us or not. The fact that they've actually learned something about their own business that they wouldn't have, but for that experience with us, that's the definition of creating customer value. And so we found that to be a very effective tool or approach to actually engage a market that has historically operated in the same way for decades. And we're trying to give them a wider purview, a wider understanding, and a forward-looking understanding that has historically not been able to be achieved. And so when you have that type of opportunity to sit with somebody, don't waste the time talking about your product and everything you can do. Actually make it relevant to them by showing the impact on their own business. And that is the best advice I can give. Back in the consulting days, when we would work with, technology startup companies or life science companies, or pick your industry sector that we did business in, that was one of the core pieces of advice we'd always give people, because that has just far more relevancy and a far greater value that you're communicating and demonstrating in that initial or second interaction that you may have with that prospective buyer.
I would say there's two factors to this, right? A, you're shortening the sales life cycle, which is benefiting you, but it's also helping the legacy owners who have a tough time kind of believing in the tech because they think they know better than anybody else. And you're kind of giving them that information to open their eyes and realize, hey, this actually could work for me and help me gain advantage over my competitors.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people don't like skeptics, and I tend to welcome them, because if I can convert a skeptic to an advocate, that is worth its weight in gold, because there are many people, and it's not just in the real estate space, it's true across multiple industries, particularly mature industries that have operated in the same way over and over again, that when you introduce something new, you have to be able to prove your value. You can't just talk about your value. You have to be able to demonstrate your value, right? And you have to demonstrate it in ways that are meaningful to that end prospect or that end user. And so I would agree with that statement that you just made. And we find that the more we can distill it down to very impactful insights that have some real impact on where they are in their decision-making process, and give them that as part of that demo, that's a very valuable a moment in time for them. And we found it to work very favorably for us. And over the years, back in the consulting days, we know it worked very well for our clients. So I would say that for those people who are building new products, first of all, make sure that there's a real need for your product, right? I think one of the challenges in any technology sector, whether it's PropTech, biotech, information technology, the dot-com boom, there are cycles that repeat themselves over and over again, right? You have your boom and bust cycles. And some of that has to do with the larger economic environments, but some of that has to just do with the relevancy and durability of the idea to that industry. And so I think what you're seeing now, particularly in the PropTech space, is that those products or platforms or new technologies that really have staying power, that can actually directly impact the bottom line performance or the decision making or the operations of a property. Those things are beginning to separate from the rest of the PropTech sector and really be the high performers. And I think you're going to see the wheat separate from the chaff a bit here, where a lot of the more, oh, isn't it cool that we can do this, kind of fall to the wayside, because those things just don't have the long-term relevancy that things that have a very concrete value and satisfy an unmet need in a market have. And that's the fundamental difference. And that those dynamics are going to separate the winners and the losers in those sectors. And it's not just PropTech. It's happened historically over every technology boom and bust cycle. And PropTech is no different.
Michael, let's go a little deeper on that. I'm really glad that you ended on that. Speaking of the PropTech sector, let's go a little deeper on that. I want to tug at that string a little bit. What are your thoughts on the sector, not only today, but your outlook on it, especially as we're entering the age of artificial intelligence? If you go to any conference these days, it's a PropTech conference or any type of tech conference, I think we can all agree, all of a sudden there's a lot of AI solutions that popped up overnight that weren't there a year or two ago. So we're entering into the age of artificial intelligence. AI runs on data. Data is gold, as we're saying. Let's go a little deeper on that. Your outlook on the PropTech sector. What's it getting right today? What's it not getting right? And where's it going to be in the next few years?
So I think anytime there's a shiny object is introduced to a market, and I love the use of that phrase.
It's so good. I know, it's so good.
People tend to gravitate to the shiny object.
Exactly, right?
And there's no question that AI and its future iterations will have profound impacts, not just on the real estate sector, but across the entire business and ecosystem, as well as the consumer world. But to make AI work, or for that matter, any new technology, there are certain fundamental factors that have to be present in a market or an organization to really leverage the capabilities of those technologies, not just in terms of which ones do I buy, right? There are so many stories about people investing in new technology only to find out that it fails, that implementation of that technology platform ultimately fails, whether it's because there's a skills gap within an organization. So the promise of the technology is still there, but the people who are responsible for delivering that promise aren't present in the organization, so the technology fails, right? Or they don't know how to interpret and apply the power of those technology platforms, or in our case, the data analytics out of Rockerbox, to the various internal processes that they have built their organization around. So I think there's no question that the industry, meaning the real estate industry, will certainly benefit long-term from the promise of AI and what it can do. And there are several organizations that have taken a very different approach than others, where they have actually built out part of their staffing complement to be data scientists, to be technology people, to know how to leverage these things and be at the forefront, or if you will, ahead of the proverbial curve as compared to the rest of the industry, because you need that type of intelligence and knowledge in your organization to make these things work. Things like AI or other data platforms, they're only as good as the information that feeds them. So if your information is bad going in, yes, you may get a more brilliant output, but it's going to be based on bad data. So it still doesn't solve the problem. And part of that gets resolved by who you ultimately have that is responsible for the adoption and use of that technology. And I think that's a growing pain for the industry. I think the staffing complement of the industry to kind of keep up with the Joneses, if you will, in terms of how technology is evolving so quickly, that is a huge skills gap in the industry, because historically the industry has never had to have that complement of people to do what it does. And today it's a very different world, and it's only going to accelerate. So being able to actually diversify your employee base to have the kind of skills and knowledge and expertise in these technology sectors not only makes you far better of a buyer in terms of what technology should I actually deploy based on the needs we have or the problems we're trying to solve or the operational efficiencies that we're trying to drive, but it also ensures that when you do deploy that technology, you have the staffing capability to actually make that work. And that is, I think, a critical consideration that oftentimes that gets overlooked or talked past when people start to talk about the shiny objects. I mean, I can remember looking through the ULI survey that they run every year among real estate professionals. And if you go back, 5 years prior to today, you'll start to see things pop to the top of the demands: better data, more data, better analytics. But more data is just more data unless you know how to interpret that data. And interpretation isn't just from a technology standpoint like Rockerbox, but it's also the people on the ground who know how to apply it to whatever decision point or gate that you're in. And those factors that keep on popping or percolating to the top in terms of industry needs, they haven't really changed much, right? Now what's happened is AI is also in the top of the heap, but it still requires the right people with the right competencies to make these things work. And the one piece of advice that I would give people when they're thinking about deploying technology, particularly on the operational side, is make sure you have the people who know how to make it work. Otherwise, you're going to be expending huge dollars and not get the return that you think you are. And it's almost better to wait to have the people in place before you buy and deploy that technology than the other way around. And the challenge is people gravitate to the shiny new thing. And that's what you're seeing happen right now in the industry.
I always liken it, and it's a bit simplistic, but it really resonates with people in our industry, that you need to lay the right foundation, right? You're constructing a new asset, right? You need to lay a solid foundation. The same is with PropTech, the same as artificial intelligence, right? If the technology that you're going to buy is data-driven, like you said, it's only as good as the data that's going in. Scrub your data, clean your data. And then also make sure your people are ready, and we've talked about this, right? There needs to be a certain mindset shift, whether it's re-educating or reskilling the people that you currently have, or making sure that you have the right people on board so that as you gravitate and pivot into that next stage of your organization, whatever technology it is that you're going to use, you are ready, right? And like you said, it's psychology, just going towards that shiny object. So,
well, and just to build on that point for 1 minute,
please do.
It's interesting when we typically engage with people and we ask them the kind of data they've historically relied on at various stages of a project or a portfolio's life cycle, we would often ask them, well, what changed in your business based on that data? How did you make different decisions? What drove that? And more often than not, what you'd hear is didn't make different decisions. It was just kind of this maintenance, right? We're on beam. And that tells you that A, they may not have been measuring the right things. And B, that's part of the trick to all of this, is to understand what is it that you need to be measuring? How do you then leverage the tools to ensure you're measuring the right things? And that also comes from the skill set that's resonant within your employee base. Because I'm a big believer that what gets measured gets done, but you can't measure everything. You have to know what are the factors that matter most to each of the respective either departments of your organization or the different stages of a project lifecycle. What are those leading indicators that not only tell you you're on the right track or wrong track and equip you with the insights to take proactive measures to correct where you're failing and ultimately amplify where you're doing really well, but it also ensures that those things have the correlative effects on all the other pieces of that process and project to say, okay, we now know that if we improve our performance on these 5 things, it's going to have a multiplying effect across all these other factors. So figuring out first, what is it that you need to measure? depending on where you sit in an organization and what your responsibilities are. And then what's the best mechanism to measure that? And how does that impact all these other factors? That's a task in and of itself. And you need to figure that out before you start leveraging technology. Otherwise, you're going to be an information overload. It's like drinking out of a fire hose, and it's almost analysis paralysis. So you have to be able to really drill down to the very essence of those things that matter and know what it is you need to measure to ultimately drive future performance and growth.
Yeah, I have to say the fact that you're talking about that they're just using it for me, it just blows my mind. That they're not even taking that data and using it effectively. I'm speechless among that front. Well, Michael, when you're not busy with work, what do you enjoy doing in your free time? Do you have any hobbies, or like what exactly do you do to unwind?
So I certainly have a few hobbies. I'm an avid tennis player. I would love to say I'm an avid golfer. I love golf, but golf is my handicap. So no matter how hard I try, and I certainly enjoy Formula One racing is one of things that I really enjoy doing with my son Hudson. And my daughter Chloe is a big fan of Legos. You can actually see several Legos in my background. So those are some of our passions. And it's nice to not only have passion for my own, but also sharing them with my children and my wife. It's a really just a wonderful life benefit to have that.
First thing I want to say is I'm a huge tennis fan as well. I named my son Rafa. If you know what I'm talking about.
Oh
there.
Yes,
Yeah.
Rafa Nadal, one of the
Yeah,
greatest.
very sad that he retired, but he was still one of the most magnificent tennis players of all time. But what I really want to know is, how does Formula One correlate to your business or how you do things on a day-to-day basis?
Ooh, good question.
So it's interesting. When you think about Formula One, most people think about the car and the driver and how fast they go around the track. But there are hundreds, if not thousands of people on every Formula One team that have very different responsibilities than just the driver, that are data engineers, that are looking at, incredible amounts of information to help optimize the performance of those automobiles. And when you think about it, Rockerbox and the data we deliver to our end customer is about optimizing the real estate projects at different stages of a project's life cycle. So there is some parallel, not the same data, but in terms of Formula One today is probably one of the most data-driven sports, just given the amount of information they collect, not just among their own team, but among all the competing teams around the track, to ultimately really find that extra millisecond of speed or pace around the track that can make the difference between coming in first and second. And think of that in terms of real estate. If I'm able to amplify your performance by that much more, where you outperform the competition, what does that mean to you in terms of the performance, yield, and value of your product? So there is some overlap from the data synergies there in terms of how data-driven Formula One is today. And I think that is probably the most appropriate connection or analogy that I can make. But let's be honest, Formula One is just exciting. It just is. And so as exciting as real estate is, Formula One is more exciting.
Oh, I think our audience would agree with that.
I'll have to say my first exposure to even the term of Formula One was in the movie Talladega Nights, where Sacha Baron Cohen's character came in and was this prim and proper French driver looking down upon the NASCAR drivers of Ricky Bobby and whatnot. But anyway, my knowledge has expanded much since then.
Yes.
Speaking of knowledge, Michael, you've been a wealth of knowledge today and so many lessons, and we thank you for that. That being said, we cannot let you go without asking you one final question. Michael, what lessons have you learned along your journey that have been most impactful to you?
That's a good question. I think for me, as a entrepreneur, meaning coming out of the political world, starting a consulting company, running that for nearly 24 years, cannibalizing that consulting business to launch a technology company that really did much of what our consulting company did, but in a different way. I'd say one thing is never quit. If you have an idea that actually has merit and value, and that is validated among the people you're trying to serve, there's always going to be tough times. I will tell you, for Rockerbox, we launched our first product, in probably the worst, most difficult real estate market in recent memory, due to the impacts of the pandemic. And it was a very tough first year because nobody was really buying and building something new, compared to the velocity and volume of development and transactions prior to the pandemic in the late teens of the past few years. So I think that's an important lesson. There's an old quote, which I'm going to bastardize it a bit, but it basically says, at the time things are hardest is usually at the moment in time where you're about to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And there are a lot of, I think, people who hang up their jackets at that moment. And the reality is, to me, that is exactly the wrong time to do that. It is the time to actually double down in yourself and what you believe that you're able to deliver. So that's a very important lesson. And the other thing is, because we have such a depth of data, we can speak with a level of confidence about what we know and understand. I certainly never want to come across as being arrogant or a know-it-all, right? Be humble. There are things that you're going to learn that you don't expect in your professional careers, regardless of what they are. And you have to take those to heart. You have to learn from them, because it is not just what the market is reflecting to you, but it's also how you engage with others and how you build that network of support across your career trajectory. And you never want to be, the guy who gets to the top of the ladder and then at one point finds himself or herself falling down that ladder only to be stepped on by the people that you stepped on going up that ladder, right? It doesn't cost anything to be humble and to be nice and respectful to all the people that you are working with and encounter. And that's just the way I believe, at least that's the way I operate, or at least try to operate, and certainly surround myself with people who share that same mindset and behavioral pattern.
I follow that same advice, except I'm not really nice to Nadine.
Well, I suspect maybe she's not so nice to you either.
Yeah, so it works. That's why.
I always wanted a brother. And now I have one, right? So it comes with the territory.
I think my children, my son and daughter, would likely say the same thing. I can't tell you how many times, like, my wife and I will be like, "Can you just stop arguing? Can you be nice to one another?" And, but they're still young. So they're in that, that teen tension set of years. So they're more loggerheads than anything else, but that's okay. Hopefully they'll emerge beyond that and realize just how much they care for each other and need to support one another as they get older. But, that's the natural teenage years.
Well, they have a wonderful role model in you, Michael. So I'm sure that they will.
Thank you. It's very kind for you to say. And I really enjoyed the conversation, and I hope the comments and discussion are valuable to your viewership and listenership. And should there ever be a need for follow-up, I am glad to hop back on the line with you, because I really enjoyed the conversation. And I love the Formula One question. That's a great question.
Thank you, Michael. So be sure to stay tuned for our recap after a word from our sponsor. Hey there, CRE Unplugged fam. We would like to give a huge shout out to our sponsor, the game changers over at Hilo, the customer experience platform for buildings that's turning heads in the real estate world.
That's right. Can we talk about how Hilo is transforming the way we manage properties and create unforgettable experiences? Ryan, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about Hilo?
Well, Nadine, it's all about reducing friction in property management. Hilo is like the magic wand that makes everything seamless and efficient. Say goodbye to those time-consuming tasks and hello to streamlined operations and communications.
efficiency is crucial. But what about personalized experiences? Hilo takes it to the next level with a vision to tailor each interaction to the needs and preferences of its customers.
And let's not forget the community aspect. Hilo builds vibrant, connected communities. It's fostering a sense of belonging and togetherness.
Now, here's something that truly sets Hilo apart: their commitment to advancing ESG initiatives. They're not just about buildings, they're about making a positive impact on the environment. That's a win-win for everyone.
So, to our listeners out there, if you're ready to elevate your properties, digitize and enhance customer experience, and maximize satisfaction, Hilo is the answer. Please visit hiloapp.com for more information. That's hiloapp.com. Nadine, we have so much to unpack here with Michael. I would like to start and talk about, I really love his perspective on finding the light at the end of the tunnel. It kind of reminded me of Barbara Corcoran when she came and spoke at the NEOC conference that you and I went to. And she talked about when she was doing Shark Tank, she would know which companies would succeed based on their resilience and vision during the challenging times that they had after they had that big sales bump after the show. So I think that mindset's really crucial for founders who are navigating such a complex real estate landscape.
Honestly, that one hit close to home for me, Ryan. As you know, and I share this a lot with you, I've been building my own firm for the last almost 3 years now, legal and consulting firm, and it's hard. And then when Michael said that point about the moment when some founders want to hang up the jacket is the point that they shouldn't. And usually it's shortly thereafter that things turn for them. Had a lot of moments where I want to hang up that jacket and I don't, and I don't. So I have to say, personally speaking, that one hit close to home for me from Michael, and I appreciated his insights on that. Absolutely. Yeah. I got to say, for me, one of my takeaways from Michael, and we talk about this a lot, right, is that our industry, historically, commercial real estate, is pretty good at gatekeeping, right? And what I mean by gatekeeping is we traditionally don't really give credit or don't really listen to folks from other industries that want to come in and give us a new way of looking at something or a new way of doing something. And Michael's ability to take his successful career as a political strategist and recognize the parallels with voters, right, within who are voting, right, and the parallels to that in commercial real estate and how it's all just data, right, was really resonated with me. That's not something that's easily done. Our industry is not always keen to listen to people who have a different perspective, who, let's just say, haven't come up within the industry. And so I think we need to highlight more stories like that. People that have effectively bypassed, the gatekeeping, have gotten over the moat, have made their way in, and have really delivered value to our industry. And in his case, in the multifamily sector, by recognizing those parallels and by making that shift. That was a big one for me. Yeah.
Isn't it incredible how innovative thinking can transform industries? I think it's amazing and fascinating to see a lot of founders right now from the crypto and healthcare business. They're now pivoting to real estate because they're recognizing the untapped opportunities and potential within the sector. They're knowing that it's still early days in the real estate tech industry. And I believe a lot of other industries right now are looking into real estate and are saying, there's opportunities here. We can take advantage of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is that the focus is now becoming more and more on the people within our industry. We've talked about this a lot. We talked about this in the interview with Michael, right? How historically, given the fact that money was cheap and a lot of people were able to purchase assets and just come in and kind of operate them in I don't want to say bare bones manner, but not really put the focus on the people that are within those assets. And now that the focus is shifting, right? And again, kind of just building off of what I was saying about, Michael being able to overcome the gatekeeping, he recognized that occupants, right? And in his case, multifamily occupants, tenants, are no different than people going to the polls to vote, right? So when you're a political strategist, what do you want to find out? What do you want to hone in on? What are the issues that matter most with people voting so that you can inform your candidate and that they can then be able to effectively, craft their communication and deliver on that. And he recognized it's no different for tenants, right? What are the amenities that matter most to you? What are the amenities that are going to matter to you today, but at the end of your term when you're up for renewal as well? And it was the same thing. And his ability to utilize data for the benefit of multifamily owners and operators, so they can keep their finger on the pulse of the needs and desires of their tenants, and not only for today, but to look around the corner a few years from now. That was really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I really loved him talking about mastering the art of the pitch. I think the ability to pitch effectively is such a game changer for startup founders. He talked about the importance of communicating in a way that resonates to the end user and having them get inspired to take action. So the skill isn't about just selling the product and having the end user look at your demo. You really want to foster that trust and align with the needs of the people you're selling to. And, we talked about this so many times, Nadine. Real estate is such a relationship-driven business. Owners talk, and the word of mouth can really amplify a company's reputation. So if you can champion one company and deliver real results, their counterparts are probably going to follow suit. And it's a reminder that building credibility in the industry often hinges upon strong and trusted partnerships.
You said it perfectly. You did. And honestly, his take on pitch strategies really hit close to home to me for when I also worked in a PropTech company. And, the playbook for the longest time was just get the demo, right? Just get the demo, show them the product. Yeah. And of course, they're going to see the value immediately. And sometimes it works, but a lot of times it doesn't. And so him bringing his consulting strategies into Rockerbox and recognizing that the customer journey begins on day one. The moment you make contact with that prospective end user, he's recognized you need to provide value to them from that moment on. And sometimes that value doesn't come from just showing them your product, right? And in his instance, which I think is brilliant, he's taking one asset of a prospective end user, running it through Rockerbox or whatever that may be, delivering, some type of data analytics that the owner and operator can look at and say, oh, wow, yeah, that's good stuff. I want to learn more. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. I think we need to think more of that. As you said it perfectly. Take less of the focus on the product, right, which is the demo, and more focus on the end user and providing value to them immediately.
Yeah, this is a people business, right? And you gotta have that relationship start strong from day one.
Day one. Amen. It was a great episode with Michael today. Good job.
I know. Good job by you.
Thanks, friend. All right. Well, to all of you out there, that's all the time that we have today. Thank you again to Michael Broder, CEO of Rockerbox. Please subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you get your podcasts.
We love the questions that we've been getting from you guys. So we want to answer any questions that you send to us by email. So if you have any questions, please send it to us at info@creunplugged.com. See you next time. And until then, keep your conversations real and unplugged.